TikTok is a very opinionated platform. And such, there are creators who make content about learning Spanish. And so in this video, we're going to go through some of them and I'm going to give you my thoughts and frameworks around them. My name is Hamid and I'm 16 and fluent in 4 languages, which is otherwise known as a polyglot. I got fluent in Spanish at 13 years old after 120 hours of studying. And now I help obsessed Spanish learners like yourself reach conversational fluency using my simple methods. Here's my quick before and after in Spanish.
Podré para mejorar mi español cuando no tengo mucho tiempo libre para estudiar español. Quiero aprender español. Pues para mí me gusta jugar el aeroplay para aprender español, así que ya lo sé la palabra del aeroplay.
And there you saw a transmission of one of my clients who got also conversationally fluent within a few months, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to go through 3 TikToks and I'm going to give you my thoughts and frameworks around them. And then we're going to end off with a free gift if you make it to the end, okay? So let's start. Okay, so here's the first TikTok.
Don't always respond to Hola, ¿cómo estás? With bien. ¿Y tú? Here are some more interesting ways to respond to ¿Cómo estás? Without just saying bien, ¿y tú? Or bien, ¿y usted? Hola, ¿cómo estás? Todo bien. Excelente. Muy, muy bien. Normal. Más o menos. No muy bien, la verdad. Mal. Estoy muy mal. Ay, fatal. De maravilla. Genial. Bueno,
Okay.
como siempre.
So she has a point when saying like you shouldn't always respond with the same robotic answer when someone says ¿Cómo estás? Which means how are you? So when someone asks how are you, she's saying there are different ways of saying it. There's one issue here, but let's continue watching and then I'll bring that up.
Pésimo. Horrible. Aquí, aguantando. Remember, in English, when someone asks you, hey, how's it going? You won't always respond with good. And you, there are plenty of emotions that you can express when someone asks you ¿Cómo estás? And you should try to use them. Remember, in some situations, you're going to want to say y usted instead of y tú, depending on what country you are and who you're talking.
Okay, so that point at the end was really interesting where she said that in English, when someone asks you how's it going, you're not always going to respond with good and you. And this is true. And this is the exact issue with videos like these. And obviously do whatever you want, right? As someone who learned Spanish, but just in my opinion, this is what I think. When you watch these videos where you just memorize sort of phrases to respond in to different responses in Spanish, it doesn't tackle the fundamental issue, okay? Because she just said there, in Spanish, when you're speaking with someone, you're not always going to say good and you. Just like in English, you don't say good and you. And so she's right, you do have to know other phrases. But the way that you know those phrases shouldn't be through a video like this, because that would require memorization and just learning the actual phrase. Because this has no leverage, this is just memorizing phrases. Whereas the guy who, for example, thinks that, okay, excellent. How would I say excellent in Spanish? Okay, well, the rule to say excellent is that Spanish, where's the end with ENT become ente or ante? So excellent might become excelente, and then they guess that and then they get it right. That is more leverage, and I'm going to explain this concept of leverage. So leverage is this thing where the amount of effort that you put in compared to the amount of output that you get out is much more. So let's say you do one thing and you get out 5. This means you have like a 5x multiplier. It means that you have leverage, okay? This presentation that you're watching right now, if I present it in a classroom, then maybe 20 people could see it. But now that it's on social media, 40 people can see it, 100 people, 1 million people, 20 million people can see it. And so the idea here is there's more leverage by posting on social media. In the same way, when you memorize just phrases, you get a 1-to-1 benefit. 1-to-1. So you learned excelente, good job, you learned one word. Whereas if you learned the actual reasoning behind the word excelente and you sort of had a framework to reaching there, which you can't do for all words. But for most sentences, if not every sentence in Spanish, there is a set of like steps that a native thinks through before they reach there, okay? The difference is people who just memorize these phrases, they don't go through that process of reaching to that sentence, okay? And the issue then arises where you don't actually think in Spanish. You just translate sentences in your head and then you just blur them out. And the problem with this is this doesn't lead to a back and forth where you're able to actually construct sentences. And so the main reason for that is because you're not learning the grammar behind those sentences, okay? And this is what I like to call the 3 W's, okay? Because in any Spanish sentence, there are 2 parts. What the words are and where the words are placed. So for example, there, you know that it's excelente. Or you know that it's todo bien, for example, okay? Something like that, right? You know what the words are, and then you know the placement of those words, in what order you say those words, okay? The problem is, most people memorize the what and the where, which is what that video sort of teaches. But that makes it not make sense, and this is why it matters, okay? If we took the sentence like, ¿Cómo estás? Everyone knows the what and the where, right? Everyone knows todo bien if you memorize that sort of phrase from the TikTok that we saw. But people that study in that way will struggle with grammar because they don't understand the why. And again, this is why this matters. When you understand why certain things happen, then it makes more sense. And when it makes more sense, you remember it better. And not only do you remember it better, you actually start thinking like a native. Because a native doesn't just memorize that phrase. No, a native thinks through what they're going to say, constructs the sentence, and then says it. That process of constructing the sentence requires logic, okay? And logic, by definition, means you have to be able to explain it. You have to understand the why, right? This is why a teacher is able to actually explain concepts in a certain thing. They understand the why, right? Whereas a student who memorizes, I don't know, the properties of hydrocarbons or something, is not going to perform as well on the test than the other student who understood the logic behind hydrocarbons, for example, or whatever. Okay, I use that example a lot. And the simple reason is because when you understand why things happen, you know the logic there. And when you know the logic, you're able to see the patterns and you're able to create it yourself, right? A native doesn't just directly say todo bien or bien, ¿y tú? A native doesn't memorize that phrase and then say it. A native thinks about what they're going to say because you want to think about your response, and then they construct the sentence. And by definition, you cannot build a building without the blueprint, okay? That's a good quote. You cannot build a building without the blueprint. The blueprint is the logic behind the building. If you just try to put the building together with no logic, it's going to crumble. And that's the same logic here. When you understand the why to the what and the where, when you understand how sentences are made, like for example, ¿Cómo estás? You know the conjugations behind estar, right? Then you have the blueprint for the sentences, and then you'll be able to actually construct them like a native. Because her point at the end was very valid, okay? I'm not criticizing her. She's just trying to help, right? But that point she made at the end was very interesting, where she said, in English, you're not going to respond with the same thing, right? Same thing with Spanish. You think about your response, you construct it in a Spanish way of thinking, and then you get to the sentence. And that Spanish way of thinking is only unlocked by understanding the why behind the sentences, not just learning the sentences. And in that case, you're not learning, you're actually just memorizing, which is why I say I don't learn with memorization. Again, this is just me giving my opinion. I don't mean to offend anyone. I don't mean to critique anyone. This is just my thoughts and my sort of value that I'll add to these TikToks. But I do believe that if the device is ChatGPT-able and you can find it on TikTok as the cookie cutter way of learning, it probably isn't the best. And that could be applied for every single other facet of life. If you've ever gotten deep into one topic, you probably really understand what I'm saying. So here's the next one, and we're going to watch it, and then I'm going to give my opinions on it.
I got fluent in Spanish in 3 months. Not possible. If people say that and you believe it, you're crazy. It's not possible. I'm just here as your friendly languages influencer to tell you and remind you that you don't need to rush. Every small improvement you make each day means you're on your way to fluency. Don't stress. Don't listen to this kind of clickbait. It's not true, and probably is always followed by an ad of how I got fluent using blah, 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 and then they try and sell it. Sorry, I just had to say that because this morning I saw like 3 of these videos and I was like, whoa, that's not true. It's been taking me like 8 years.
Okay, so there's some good and there's some bad, okay? We'll start with the good. She's mostly right, okay? Actually, at face value, she is right, okay? If someone says an outlandish claim and then just doesn't provide any proof, of course you shouldn't believe them, okay? That is a basic thing. I think we all sort of know that, right? Now, the bad is sort of that she believes that every single person who says that is lying. Let me actually tell you a quick story, okay? When I was learning Spanish, and what happened was I was discovering YouTubers who had gotten fluent, and they had said in like 20 days, 44 days, right? Something like very quick, okay? And so there were 2 options I could have taken. The first one is the option that this video is perpetuating, which again, no hate to her. She's just giving her opinion as I am. But it's this opinion that like, it's not possible. You can't get fluent in that amount of time. You're clearly lying that if you're fluent or whatever, okay? So that's the first option. The second is where you are actually seeing that it could be possible and you're trying out methods in order to see if they're lying or not, okay? Which was the way I took, okay? That's what I took. Personally, I was 13, okay? So maybe I was gullible. maybe not. But what I did was I tried the methods. I took the concepts from the videos and I created some exercises that I would use. So some of these exercises worked, some of them didn't. And the ones that worked are exactly the frameworks I teach now. And the reason why is because personally, I started studying Spanish around March of 2022, but I did like 10 to 15 minutes a day using language transfer, okay? And then that was in 3 months all the way until around June 1st. And around June 1st, when summer started, we had a summer break. And so I spent the entire summer studying around 1 hour a day for the whole summer. And I repeated the language transfer course, which was the grammar course that I took, twice. So it's around about 30 hours then if you do twice. And then I did 1 hour a day, more or less, during the summer. So 120 hours of studying. So the period of time, you could say I got fluent in 3 months or 6 months, okay? Now, when I say fluent, there's a few things here, okay? Firstly, at face value, she's right. If someone says that they're fluent and they don't provide proof, then you shouldn't believe them. But on the other hand, as one of these people who do tell the truth about their story by saying, yes, I got fluent in this period of time, that seems very impressive, there's a level of proof and credibility that we have to provide, okay? But also I can tell you that this opinion of people who are against people who got fluent quickly, there's also some issues there, okay? So firstly, let me just show you my transformation from those 2 points, okay?
Estoy comiendo comida. Podré comprender.
So as you can hear, my Spanish, that was before, right? That's me after 30 hours after doing the language transfer, okay? So you can see, obviously not fluent.
Spanish shows de español.
And I'm not lying when I said I started at 13 years old. You can hear my voice then and now, okay? And then this was directly after that summer. So 120 hours, 3 months later, okay?
Para mejorar mi español cuando no tengo mucho tiempo libre para estudiar español, voy a hablar español cuando tengo tiempo libre, pero no sé, no como en serio.
So as you can hear, that Spanish isn't actually this super fast brrr Spanish that a lot of these fake transformations may show. Because this is my real transformation. I'm not lying to you here. So you might think, okay, but is that fluency? And this is where the main issue here is, okay? Because she's right that when people say that they reached fluency, that they're lying when it comes to what we're talking about, what we define as fluency. Because at this point, you can hear, I was still saying, I was still pausing here and there, but I was still able to have conversations with natives. Here's where we get into the definition of fluency, which probably changes what this creator thinks about these transformations. So usually being fluent or fluency is defined as being able to speak effortlessly and articulately, okay? This is what these critics basically, this is what they think, okay? Which if you want to think fluency is that, by all means you do you, okay? But this isn't accurate in relation to what most people think that fluency is. Most people don't think that perfection is fluency because by definition you can't be perfect in any language, okay? Most people's definition of fluency, the thing that most people want out of the language that they study, when they say they want fluency, what they really mean is being able to have conversations and connect with people, okay? It's kind of like Shalma's ability, this like YouTuber who learns immersive languages, okay? He doesn't actually learn like perfectly in the language, but he has learned enough so that he can initiate conversations. And maybe that's a little low level, right? He does it very quickly because he's kind of memorizing phrases, right? But the problem is with these definitions that fluency is some perfection of the language is, if you can speak fast, that doesn't necessitate that you're able to connect with people and have conversations. Now, it's correlative, of course. Most people want fluency. When they say they want fluency, they're talking about conversations. They're talking about connections with people. And so, if you can speak fast, that doesn't necessitate that you can have conversations with people, okay? And that's why I separate fluency into 2 categories, conversational and native. Conversational fluency is being able to have a conversation in Spanish where both parties understand each other and to the point where they can have a full conversation. The flow and the fluidity is in the conversation, not necessarily only in your speech, right? At that point, you can see in my after, I wasn't speaking super quickly. I was stuttering here and there. I was saying but I was still able to have conversations with natives, no problem. Now, native fluency is what some of these fake transformations online show. And it's also what in my opinion, what I think that these critics are talking about. They're talking about people who went from nothing to native fluency in 3 months. And that is actually impossible. Then those people are lying. This means that you're indistinguishable from a native. This takes years. I'm not going to sugarcoat anything. This takes years. But the reason why I separate these into two categories is because most people only care about the communication. Most people don't care about mastering the language, right? And so the goal of fluency is always going to be in the context of conversations. Almost never, only like 0.01% of people are actually going to want to learn a language to be able to write a novel. And even then, like most people don't even care about that stuff. 99.99% of people learn for the sake of conversations, for the sake of connections of people. And the reason why this matters is because of what I like to call the effort discrepancy. This is what I think the TikTok was really trying to talk about. So the difference between conversation fluency and native fluency is this. Conversation fluency takes a minuscule amount of time and effort compared to native level fluency, but the results that you get in terms of the results and like real world benefits that you get from the language is so much higher. Whereas native level fluency, the amount of time and effort that you put in is not really worth the amount of results you get. You still get some more results, right? But it's more like in the beginning when you're learning and you reach conversation fluency, you get most of the results. So when I say, and when people online like myself say, we got fluent in 3 to 6 months or something, right? This took me 120 hours of study, okay? So that's spread across 5 to 6 months, but 120 hours total. And I was able to be conversationally fluent, and you can see my Spanish afterwards. This is something I'm still working on, and it's been 3 years since 2022. And so the transformations that you see that say that they reach native level fluency in a few months are lying. But most of them aren't saying that. Most of them are talking about this, conversational fluency. And that is 100% possible in a few months, okay? And the reason why I know this is not just because I've done it, but because other people have done it as well. So first of all, this is an AI analysis of my transformation, and I started at 30 hours and I ended with 120, okay? So 120 total, and according to AI, I saved 200 to 250 hours of time, okay? Using my method. And that's 200 to 250 hours of time is compared to the average learner. But there are some people who say I have an advantage because I already spoke 3 languages before learning Spanish, and I am a polyglot because I speak 4 languages. AI said it was still impressive, but it's not only me who has actually gotten fluent using these methods. Here's one of my clients.
Hola, me llamo Adi. Yo tengo 15 años. Quiero aprender español porque las palabras. Hola, me llamo Adi. Tengo 15 años. Vivo en Holanda.
¿Cómo te llamas?
Pues lo primero, me llamo Eduardo, pues, y tengo 15 años. Toda la gente tenía los diferentes vocabularios. Pues para mí me gusta jugar el Rocket League para aprender español, así que ya lo sé, las palabras de Rocket League. Me gusta ir al gimnasio, ya lo sé, las palabras y el gimnasio, pues sí, ya lo sé. Toda la gente tiene diferentes formas de vocabulario. Sí, me has dicho, todo el mundo sabe que no es una forma buena de aprender español porque son español de América. Y quiero aprender español de España, de Andalucía, y no es buena para mí. Estaba en YouTube, estaba viendo los vídeos y un momento he encontrado tu vídeo de aprender español, ¿no?
Sí.
Así que he usado tu método de aprender español. Estaba haciendo esto y por eso mi nivel ha subido B1. Cuando estaba usando la transcripción en TPL y otros
there he's talking
de
about smart
métodos de
methods.
aprender español, mi nivel es mucho mejor que antes.
And so according to AI analysis of his transformation, according to him, he thought he had a B1, B2, and AI says he has a B2. And using this method compared to the average traditional methods, he saved 200 to 350 hours. And so it's kind of funny when I see these videos online that like trash on people who got fluent quickly, because on one hand, there's some truth to it, because of course there are people who say they reach native level fluency in just like a few months, which is impossible. But then there are people like me or Eduardo who reach conversational fluency very quickly, and then a lot of people online don't consider that fluency, and then that sort of gives this impression of like that they're lying, okay? The thing is though, 99% of people, like I was in that niche, I was just like you watching this video, an obsessed Spanish learner who wants to get fluent. When I thought that I wanted to get fluent, my definition of fluency, it didn't require me to be perfect. It required me to have conversations. And that's why it's called conversational fluency. But I think the main thing here, and the reason why these people critique, these transformations so much, is because they, sadly, haven't actually discovered the way to learn that effectively. Because me and Eduardo both say minimum 200 hours compared to the average traditional methods. The people that use the average traditional methods probably then got to the same level at a much slower rate in terms of hours spent studying. What they then do is compare their results to, my results or Eduardo's results or these other transformations online, and they use their own results as a benchmark for what is possible. But there is a fallacy in that, and we're gonna show it in the video right here.
Don't stress. Don't listen to this kind of clickbait. It's not true, and it's been taking me like 8 years.
There you go. It's been taking me like 8 years, so it's not possible for you. This is a fallacy. So this is a fallacy, and a fallacy just means like a logical issue, okay? The reason why this is a fallacious way of thinking is because if someone said like, my progress is the benchmark for what is possible, you'd be like, what? No, you're not the only person, are you? And so this whole narrative of like, okay, you are wrong and I'm right because my results define the universe. It's like, no, okay? The only time we can be sure of a claim is when we see it in many people that has been repeated, okay? And so the reason why I can be confident in my frameworks to say that they work at least better than the traditional methods is because I did it with myself and I've done it with others. But I do agree, again, there's good and bad. I do agree that people that don't prove that, like people who just say, I did this and therefore it's the only method that works and now you guys should all do it. And then the people that do it don't get fluent, right? That is negative because you don't have proof, you don't have credibility to what you're saying, okay? And that is kind of what's going on here, where she's saying that her experience in learning Spanish is indicative of everyone's experience, even when everyone didn't do the same things to get fluent. And also the definition of fluency is probably also different, okay? Again, don't hate her, don't like this is just me giving my opinion, okay? But yeah, this one was a funny one when I saw this one.
More language. Estoy.
This is a good video, okay? So in this video, this guy is comparing student Spanish, so basically not fluent, so people who can have conversations, and then street. So we're going to watch the video and then I'm going to talk about this concept. I talk about this all the time on my channel.
Estoy
esperando el primer descuido.
para pa.
Millonario sin dejar de ser del barrio, pa' que sepa.
So this is a concept I like to call Spanish versus real Spanish, and I talk about this all the time. So there are different like levels of Spanish, okay? And the main ones are Spanish versus real Spanish, which I like to call, and then there's actually a third one, which I call your Spanish, and that's what I get into in my program, which you can check in the description. Kind of ironic how she talks about the people that have their transformations, or the ones that sell their programs, but it's like Duolingo also sells their programs, and Babbel also sells their programs, and those are the people that don't actually provide proof of their programs working, whereas I do, and it's like, yeah. So most people learn Spanish the conventional way, okay? And this is probably what most people have experienced. You probably experienced this before. And it's why they don't succeed. And you probably already know this, but real-world Spanish is different to what school and the traditional methods has been teaching us, okay? So the first is the student Spanish, okay? And this is what the video talked about. How do Spaniards actually speak Spanish? Do they say, hola, yo hablo español? Or do they say, hola, yo hablo español, right? Firstly, they would say, hola, hablo español, right? But even then, I watched another one of this guy's videos and he gave the example of, hola, yo hablo español, okay? So the first difference there is the vowels, okay? But the main difference between Spanish and real Spanish, which is what he defines as street Spanish, is that the difference between this is even bigger, okay? So he showed it there, where estoy became toy. I would give this example almost every video, but aquí estoy in Spanish, in real Spanish would be aquí toy. Escúchame would become cúchame. Es que hay muchos problemas would become es que hay muchos problemas. And so real Spanish is firstly vowels, which is the fluent speaker, which is what he showed. But mainly it's the dropping letters and combining words, okay? And then also accent on top of that. And you put all those together and you get real Spanish, street Spanish, right? IRL Spanish. The reason why this matters is because when I was learning Spanish and when I taught my clients to learn Spanish, the goal is to learn real Spanish. And so why would we study words that don't follow real Spanish? And so if we're going to learn a word, we might as well learn the native way of pronouncing it. If you're going to learn estoy, you probably should also learn how to say how it sounds within native context. And this is where I use exercises like transcript training, like Eduardo mentioned. And it all boils down to how we learn our own native language. When we learn our own native language, or languages, like I did, were we surrounded by real English or English in quotation marks? Because you don't say, I am wanting to learn English because I'm very liking English with an Indian accent. And I don't say that to offend anyone. But it's because your parents / your environment didn't speak like that. So if someone was to learn English to go to the US, would they study the Indian accent or the American accent? Of course, the American one. Because if the goal is understanding real Spanish within like streets, within like IRL situations, well, then you should study Spanish that is in those IRL situations. And this is where I say, when I study Spanish and when I teach my clients study Spanish, I do an exercise called transcript training, which I teach in other videos. It's not really relevant right now. But basically, in that exercise, it involves watching real native Spanish content, street Spanish content, okay? And that is because of this concept between Spanish versus real Spanish. The reason why Duolingo and these apps, people who do them struggle speaking when they're in a conversation is because in those conversations, a guy is going to say toy, and then they've only learned estoy. So now they're not going to know what toy is, right? Or if someone said, es un costumbre, right? It's a custom thing, right? They would say, es un costumbre. It's like a native says it in that weird way, the smushed way, the sort of shorter way. And so if you don't learn it that way, you might struggle with it later on. And so when prioritizing conversational fluency, which is what my methods and frameworks do, and that's what this whole channel is about, right? I'm all about reaching conversational fluency as fast as possible. Well, then every single part of reaching fluency should include things that are helping you to achieve that goal. And studying real Spanish is one of those, because the goal is conversational fluency in conversations with IRL natives, and IRL natives pronounce words differently than exactly how they're written. And this matters. So those were the 3 TikToks. I hope you enjoyed this sort of format. I don't really do this a lot. This is actually like my first or second time doing one of these like reaction type videos. So if you enjoyed it, then like or comment. I would appreciate a comment because I could actually see that this is something that you'd want. So as for the free gift that I promised you in the beginning, as my gift for reaching the end, you can check the description or the pinned comment to grab my free, easy-to-use Cognate cheat sheet to instantly unlock thousands of Spanish words. No email needed. It's totally free on yours. You just get it instantly. Okay, you click on the link and boom, you got it. All right. And this cheat sheet isn't like one of those memorization cheat sheets. No, these give you tangible rules and it gives you the why behind words. For example, that word excelente, it teaches exactly how someone would reach that word through a process, through the native process, right? And so you can unlock thousands of Spanish words just because you already speak English. So check the description to grab that. It's just my gift to you, okay? Otherwise, just know that these frameworks and everything I teach in this video, in these videos, are all the small pieces from my program. And so if you want to implement these frameworks and finally start learning Spanish in a clear and structured way, then you can check the description to join my program. And it's especially for people who don't want to memorize and who specifically want to reach conversational fluency and who want to use a method that actually has proof behind it and not methods where people just promise that it works, right? I don't know about you, but I prefer proof over a promise. But I would recommend to act now because I don't know when the price may increase. So if you want the cheaper price now, then join as fast as possible. Otherwise, I would really appreciate it if you shared this video with others who you think would benefit. And I hope you enjoyed. Stay humble.